Welcome, and thanks for being here, especially since this meeting wasn't originally scheduled to be part of our process. I appreciate you making the time to be here. In fact, tonight we have 3 scheduled meetings remaining in our original timeline of June 30th. And that also happens to be the date when we exhaust our contract agreement with Brian, and I hope you'll agree that he's done a great job facilitating this conversation and guiding us through this process so far, so thank you very much. Not done yet. So, at our last meeting, you remember, we actually worked through the Articles of Agreement, a rough draft of the Articles of Agreement, and I thought that was a very productive conversation. We obviously, some sticking points came up that we'll need to circle back to. But tonight, the goal is to really see how much of the articles can we really begin to nail down, and whether or not a June 30 finale to this phase 1 of this process is possible. After tonight, my intention is to circle back with each of you and to get a sense of how you're feeling based on tonight's conversation and how much progress we make, whether you feel personally that as a committee person, you have enough information and you don't feel rushed, and that June 30th seems like a possibility for us to finally call the question and make an official recommendation or not. I certainly don't want people to feel like they don't have the information or that they're sort of rushed into making a decision, but I also know that you all signed up for an end date of June 30. So if it comes to pass that a majority of the committee is feeling like we need more time, we'll figure it out. We'll be on our own in some respects, but we will figure out how much time we need and what we need to accomplish in order to get to a successful conclusion of this process. So tonight the focus really is on how much of the articles can we get accomplished. I am also going to, later in the meeting, invite Grant back to the stage to give him an appropriate amount of time to walk us through that additional information that we just kind of previewed very quickly at the last meeting. I think it deserves a little more context and explanation. And if we still have time, we'll ask for an update from the Communications Task Force. You may be aware that we issued a survey earlier this week, and we have over 510 responses. So it's pretty exciting to see people getting engaged, and I think even Ben should show some of the stats that are coming through the survey. So before we begin with the formal agenda, are there questions of me or Brian before we get started?
Yeah, I actually have a
Yes.
question, and it may be premature to even say it is, and you don't have to answer it. But it strikes me that, I guess I need clarity about whether that you see this committee's, the end of this committee's work as the acceptance of the, as having a recommendation, recommended articles.
Yeah.
And position, or whether our work really goes beyond that in terms of communication.
In my mind, and this is just the way I've been able to try to wrap my brain around it, June 30 for me represents sort of the conclusion of phase 1, which would be a recommendation. I think the committee and members of the committee who want to continue to be engaged could then help with engaging the community and developing, that kind of communication information and, helping with public forums and that kind of thing.
And from a statutory standpoint, your legal responsibilities end if you bring the articles for a vote, and that vote is affirmative. The day after that vote, your duties are done.
Okay.
Right, but there was still a report that would need to be written, and so there's lots of work that would remain. I'm just interested to see if we can at least wrap up that initial phase by the original date of June 30. Martha?
Would you see the committee getting back together, assuming it all went forward?
Sure.
Would you see the committee getting back together after we receive this response from the Agency of Education and before we went out to do the community forums?
I think so. We looked at a sort of an extended timeline that we put up on the screen last week that had some of those future dates. So, and these dates go into November, and so I think that the committee would meet again and have work to do after that acceptance. Great. Doesn't look like we have any visitors to be heard, so I will ask for a motion to approve the minutes of June 9th.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion, edits, corrections? All those in favor? Opposed? Minutes passed, thank you. So at this point, I will turn it over to Brian for round 2 of our discussion of the Articles of Agreements.
So here was the thinking for tonight was, as we talked about this, was to look at the articles. And one, I want to thank you all for being here tonight because I appreciate people adding to your schedule in terms of something that's not planned. So this is really a good turnout. And my thinking on this was to review the articles in a format that I'm going to share with you momentarily and operate that where you're comfortable, where you're ready, is that we tentatively approve those articles that you're ready to move forward on. And those that are not, we're going to get to. So what I have for you here is just a breakdown of the sequence that I was going to suggest. And basically the concept is trying to hit the low-hanging fruit initially, get to the ones that seem pretty straightforward, and let's move on from there. The discussion from our meetings last week, some of the bigger ticket items were the necessary advisable language in the first article, the board design in terms of what approach you would use to determine board representation and what the years of service would be as how that's laid out. And then the other one of the cost benefit piece, which is Article 15. So what I'm suggesting tonight is this sheet that I'm giving to you is the sequence in terms of how we go forward to the articles. And Brendan and I talked a little bit about this, but what I'm going to suggest is that we approach this from the standpoint that if you're comfortable with that particular article, then let's say so and move on. We can have as much discussion as we go, as you get further down that list, you're going to have probably more discussion would be my guess. And I'm hoping that I used reasonably sound judgment in my selection of the sequence so that those that are pretty straightforward can be dealt with pretty straightforward. And the other qualifier that I would add is because we're doing this over the next 2 meetings, which were additionally scheduled meetings, that my suggestion is that there is no final approval of the articles until the final meeting at the 30th, when we've got the full group present. So that whatever you do here tonight is done with the understanding that it's a tentative good to go. But if everybody here is good to go with Article number 3, then it's probably likely that when you get to the end point, you're going to be doing the same thing. But there may be some sticking points as we get a little bit further into this. So let me just pull up the articles. And I was intentional in terms of not sending back out the articles in a newer version for this week. Yeah, it doesn't have the articles. I was looking for the articles.
Let's go back to the website.
Right here, this one. Okay. Skip this one. So are people okay with that approach for the night?
Sure.
Good. So Article number 3. Yeah, great. Article number 3 is that, and we have Chris here as well to add any legal insight into this, but I would just offer again that some of this is pretty straightforward language, and there's going to be responsibilities that will fall upon the shoulders of a newly elected school board, and doesn't mean that this committee can't say, and maybe a better example would be the one that we talked about, transportation services. Chris has recommended this language. You don't have the responsibility to say that transportation services are going to be provided K-12. That's going to be ultimately a board decision. You can certainly make a recommendation as a study committee that you want the board to seriously consider transporting all kids, or however you want to phrase that. But so there will be some additional pieces to these that you can speak to. in what Chris referred to almost as a preamble, or what the Chittenden East group had put together. So Article number 3, the Union District will honor all pre-existing master agreements and individual employment contracts that are in place for the forming school districts as of June 30th, 2017. Master and individual agreements will continue until their respective specified termination dates. So the first piece is just making sure people understand what that means. Chris talked through this last week. Are there any questions about what that language is? Essentially, it's just saying is that all contracts are good to go, and that it becomes the responsibility of the new board to negotiate new contracts, employ people that may not be part of collective bargaining agreements that are under individual contracts. Tom, did you have a question?
Well, just for clarification,
And
Chris
feel
talked
free to
about
comment.
Articles 1 and 2 being voted on and therefore binding, and the rest of the articles up to the discretion of the school board. What discretion do they have as to this statement that the contracts will continue?
What discretion does the board have? Well, with any of the collective bargaining agreements, they would, Chris, I would assume, go ahead, I'll let you answer that.
So with regard to all the collective bargaining agreements, they would have to do one of two things, either negotiate new agreements, or alternately, to honor the existing ones. They don't have any flexibility about doing something else. And I might modify this language slightly between tonight and your next meeting, but state law at this point is real clear that the new board has two options. They negotiate new agreements or they honor the existing ones, period.
So if there's a contract in place that, or master agreement that extends through, I don't know, 2019, it doesn't necessarily extend through 2019.
It would only not extend candidly if the new board and the new association or associations agreed to change it.
So if it was scheduled to terminate on June 30th, 2019, then the board has that contract to live through for the next 2 years, unless they renegotiate.
So at this point, both Chittenden Central, the member districts in Chittenden Central, and Essex Town are on a compatible cycle so that they do not have agreements that would carry beyond the year that the new district became operational. And they have tried to coordinate their negotiations, I think, over the last 6 months so that they're looking at a compatible timeline. And part of the purpose of the 15 to 18 months before the new district becomes fully operational is to permit the new board to negotiate agreements that would take effect when it became operational.
Wes, and then we've got Kim, and then we've got Keely.
Do I remember it was last week we said something, or it was said that the contracts are very similar?
The salary schedules or the contracts themselves?
The contracts themselves.
I would say, they're similar, but it's a little bit like saying a Ford is similar to, you know, a Dodge or something else at this point. I mean, all cars have similarities and all master agreements have similarities. Probably, you know, the agreements are as similar as the agreement in Chittenden South at some level at this point. The agreement in Chittenden Central that covers Westford, Essex Junction, and the high school is a newer agreement. And by newer, I mean they totally renegotiated the language a year ago and have, for the most part, brand new contract language. It's a little bit more up to date than the town's contract in that context.
Mark, any perspective you want to share on that as superintendent?
I like the analogy. They both run very well. We used the good work of E46 and Prudential and Westford, and we took some of their language and were able to negotiate some of that into our new collective bargaining agreement that was ratified this week. And there's some things that we stayed away from, so there's good and there's things that we want to consider.
Kim?
I was just gonna say that we had just ratified, our term will come up on the 17th, or it's a 2-year contract. So presuming the CCSU, which expires this year, is negotiating for 1 year, we will be in alignment to expire both contracts come July 1, 2017. So my question is, what happens in the expiration of both contracts? Should we not have a newly negotiated master agreement? Because these things, as you know, Chris, can take some time.
So state law is real clear at this point, which is that if the new board isn't able to successfully negotiate a new contract by July 1, 2017, they are required to honor the pre-existing contract. So those employees that were covered by the Essex Town Agreement would continue to be covered by it. Those employees that were covered by the Chittenden Central Agreement would still be covered by it.
Keely? No more?
My question was, could the language in this article be construed to refer to any sort of agreement other than employment agreements that we might not want to be talking about here? Like agreements about leasing things or, I don't know,
No, this article is only dealing with employment.
but that's
issues.
entirely clear.
It is entirely clear in terms of the language. I tell you that the new district's going to be a successor to any of the forming districts. And so just as a basic matter of law, without looking at those, leasing contracts or other things, the new districts, in all likelihood, would be bound by those. Because they're a successor to the forming district. So if Westford had a 7-year copier agreement, they're gonna be hung up with that agreement in all likelihood.
Martha?
I have 2 questions. The first is, if there isn't a new agreement and you hire new employees into this new district, where do they go?
The quick answer is that's up to the board and the association or associations to decide. They are, all of their seniority would be recognized. I can't probably emphasize it enough. This used to be a big issue 10 years ago. It's not now. The legislature has fundamentally resolved this, and I don't mean this in a partisan way, but in favor of employees, so that there's no doubt their seniority is protected, their benefits are protected, they're not, quote, new employees that are on probation. Essentially, the new union inherits these employees with everything they brought to it at the time they were, their employment's transferred.
And so that leads to the second question. Should we say something about according to these sections of law?
So that's part of what I'm going to look at, Martha, is whether or not there's any benefit in doing that
Well, it just-
at this point.
Might help citizens understand that we're not creating this out of whole thought.
Wes?
Just want to say why I brought that up. I just didn't want to anticipate an inequity, because there's a big voting block for teachers in all 3 towns. So if you start off with, somebody saying you've got a better contract than we have, then we're, I don't want to say dead in the water, but there are a lot of voters who, from the teachers, that could turn. That's all I was asking. But it sounds like it's pretty equitable, as you said, competitive.
They're comparable contracts. They're the 2 of them. If you wanted to rank contracts in Chittenden County from an employee perspective, they're both among the top 5 contracts in the county. I would say from any perspective.
And that's the answer I would give citizens out there, what are the contracts like? They're very similar, they're very compatible.
Marla?
If, let's say, we went forward and we had a positive vote for, July 1st, 2017, there would be nothing stopping the union from approaching the board and saying, we'd like to renegotiate early. If they saw that, I mean, that's always a possibility, isn't it?
The board,
So the board has an obligation, once they're constituted, to make this one of their top priorities. I mean, it is one of the few things that they are obligated to do under state law now, Marla. So I wouldn't want to judge it, but if I were advising the board, I would say, if you were formed in December of 15 or April of 16, I would notify the associations probably within 2 months that you want to commence negotiations for a master agreement. And the question, I think, in part was that some of the answers were targeted towards teachers. There are support staff agreements in place for all of the districts except for Westford. And all of those agreements would also fall under this provision, and the board would also be obligated to negotiate those. So it's a big agenda item for them to accomplish.
I think we're in sync on that one as well. We've also settled the 2-year contract with the support staff. Mark, I think we're in sync, right? I believe the Chittenden Central's support staff expires June 30, 2017.
Any other questions on this or need for more information? So, let's try this. How about a thumbs up if you're good to go tentatively with this article? And thumbs down if not? Shaky. Marla's got a
Can we do it with a caveat? I think Martha raised a valid point to look at the language if there's a,
So if Chris, with the understanding that if Chris feels that there needs to be more explicit language added to that to clarify, then that would be added, and you'll see that again. Would that be, get that, give you a thumb up? All right, we're going to take that as a yes, and we're moving to number 4. All right. No new school buildings are necessary to or proposed for the formation of the Union District. The Union School District Board will operate existing facilities commencing 2017, July 1, 2017. So, clarification on what that's saying or understanding. Brendan?
Brian, I have a question as to whether or not, one of the issues that we know is a hot button issue for some members of the community, but also I think it's addressed in one of the pieces of legislation, is whether or not we should talk about not closing school buildings
Yes,
in this particular article.
that's another, yeah.
It is not where you talk about it.
Okay.
If the committee
Right.
chose to include a provision, you would include it in a separate article. So this point in Article 4 is something that you are specifically required to address and include in an article, one way or the other. It's sort of a truth in mind or a disclosure, which is the voters need to know whether you believe a new school building needs to be built so that they know, gee, this proposal is going to carry with it probably a $10 or a $15 million bond to build a new school. That's why it exists in state law.
Okay, thank you.
Julie?
Is the Park Street School an existing school facility in one of our districts? Or is it a Parks and Rec property?
no, it's the Essex Junction School District's property.
property, but it's not an operating
I mean,
school.
it has pre-kindergarten happening in it.
It is an operating school because part of the building is used for ACE. The high school, to have an ACE
That's
program,
the continuing
they
ed.
can't hold it within this building. So if we did anything with Park Street, at this point, you wouldn't want to consider moving Ace out of there, because then you would have to consider another location.
I just wanted to understand, since we hadn't ever talked about Park Street, but
Yeah,
I knew there was.
but the
some
Essex
separate-
Junction School District does own the property.
And you'd agree with that, if that would
Yes.
be considered to be an existing?
I think it's being used for school purposes, so it's a school facility.
Tom?
I was trying to look ahead in the articles just to see, was there any statement in the future articles about no intentions of closing schools for these 4 years, or something like they had in the Chittenden?
In the original, Chittenden.
I don't remember seeing that.
There isn't, and I did briefly address the issue the last time you met. If the committee made a decision and said, we want to try to form as a red only, and we have no interest in trying to form as a preferred district under the new law, Act 46, then that provision absolutely would need to be there. If you want to form under Act 46, I would tell you the provision doesn't need to be there, and it may not want to be something that you include, because I don't think it's enforceable in that context. It is enforceable relative to a red, because the statute that authorized the creation of reds has a specific section dealing with school closure. So part of it depends on which track the committee decides to go on. If you decide to go on both tracks, and I don't want to confuse that a lot, that's something that you'll have to consider, and Brian and I have talked briefly about that, and I can come back to you with some language on it that follows state statute relative to that.
And I think just keeping this simple is that what it says is what your intent is that you're not forming a new district and all of a sudden you're going to either look at building or constructing a new facility, and that no other buildings are necessary, so you're not in need of other facilities, whether you build them or you build.
I'm getting that it's a sense of the committee that it is a statement that wants to get made somewhere. That is the statement, I'm not closing the school. And I wonder if we need a parking lot or something where those notions get reported. Obviously, the language will be done legally, and it's complicated in whether how it happens. But I think it's important for our committee to at least know that if it's true, that that's something we want to be sure doesn't get lost.
I think it's a great point, Jill, and I think that you can operate that as you start to build your communication for the public, that you might be able to say, Article number 4 reads, here's how to explain it in layperson language, and here's our intent. And that would be in maybe your preamble document that precedes the articles, or in some kind of explanatory communication. Brendan?
Does this article as written tie the hands of the future school board that may determine that a new school building is necessary in the future?
No.
Okay.
So, you know, I won't get into my frustrations with the Unified Union Statute, but this language is an outgrowth of a provision in state statute that was written in the early 60s. And it's because all of the new union school districts that were created in the 60s required significant capital construction projects before they could open the doors. So that's the disclosure part of it. It in no way ties the hands of the board after July 1st of 2017 to say, you know what, that Westford building needs a major addition to it. Here's what we need to do. Or we're going to have to add a school in Essex Town. Here's what we're going to need to do. So it doesn't tie their hands. It's really in order for the district to begin operations, do we need a new school.
Thank you.
So to the extent that this is not tying their hands, is we could, if we decide not to add the red language, just add a sentence like, the committee sees that the number of school buildings that we currently have is appropriate and does not recommend adding or subtracting from it.
I don't think you necessarily add that here, but I think you would want to include that in your explanation.
Well, but can we have it in the articles somewhere?
I defer to Chris on that in terms of the necessity of
I
that.
guess the question I'd ask is why? I mean, you know, part of the purpose of the articles is you're forming a corporation. And what you're trying to do is provide a framework for the corporation to function and for that board to be able to operate just the same way your boards do now, so that if they decide that they need to build a building, they have the ability to do that. And so, you know, candidly, from a perspective of you're trying to build the frame, you're not trying to build the entire house. What generally you want to try to do with your articles is to minimally address what you need to address and permit the board the flexibility to finish the house and to furnish it. And if they want to operate it as an inn, to be able to operate it as an inn. Martha?
Have you had an opportunity to review the comments that are coming into the survey?
The survey of you or the survey of
The survey that we just sent
Yes.
out to the community?
yeah,
Because the whole issue of closing Westford School, I think that's what folks are reacting to. It's over and over and over in the comments that are coming back.
So you have a place that you can add a separate article about school closing if you want to do that, but that's different than this one. And again, I think the context and the history of some of this language is important to also know. But if that's a concern, then that can be addressed in terms of the intent of the committee or the new board was not to close schools for. And it goes back to Chris's point about whether that is restrictive or not for the new board. But it may be an important issue for Westford. So you're going to have to weigh all that. So Anne's over here. Yeah.
Doesn't the red directive have a time frame that schools would not be closed?
4 years.
So
Yeah.
is that something that could be going in here that would ensure the Westford folks, at least currently, that nothing's going to change for 4 years?
So I guess I just want to emphasize, I think that two things. One, if you want to form as a red, you have to include it.
Sure.
That's one, as well as you're bound by it. The new district would be bound by it if they're formed as a red. The second thing is, it's not something you'd want to include in Article 4, and I think you mentioned, can we just park that concept so that if the committee wants to head in that direction, then it can be added when you make a decision about that.
Marla?
If that was added to Article 4, am I understanding it correctly? If we added language like that, then we're taking the path of forming a red and not looking at the accelerated version. Is that what you're still trying? You're trying to still work it so that we can go either way?
That's a good characterization of it, Marla. You also, I really want to be clear, you would not put it in Article 4. It might be Article 20, or it might be Article 14, and you could be very explicit about it. And state statute, as I said, if you form a red, this is an automatic. There's a prohibition in the statute.
But if we want, let's say in Article 20 to state something like that, will that article make it so that we only can be a red?
No,
Okay.
no, it would be an add-on.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it different since MMU, or MMU, however you use it, did their, Chittenden did their articles? I was just looking, it's not in, Article 4 is not in their articles anywhere. Was it because they didn't need it or the rules were concerns?
They weren't looking at forming a clear unified union, they were looking at forming a red only right from the outset. And Act 46 didn't exist.
Okay? So the question for you is, are you comfortable with tentatively approving Article number 4 at this point in time? Thumbs up?
With Jill's recommendation, I have a
Good.
breakdown.
Hang on a minute. Any thumbs down? All right. And Keely, your comment?
With Jill's recommendation that we have a
Yeah.
parking lot for things you want to find somewhere else. to put.
Yeah, great, great. Yeah, and I think that all of these are going to generate some target points, talking points for you as you go forward, and maybe some additional language or different language. Okay, Article 5. Union School District Board shall determine in accordance with state and federal law the transportation services to be provided to students in the Union District. Tom?
Sorry, I should have mentioned something or asked for something before you started reading that. But I don't know who has had or who does have the survey that Martha was referring to, the results. And I certainly have not. Is there a way for us to get to that point?
Tom, we're gonna review some of the survey responses if we have time at the end of this meeting. And it was a survey that was issued earlier this week, and so we collected about 500 responses so far.
And it went out just, I didn't,
I forget who received it.
Front porch forum.
Everyone,
It was Front Porch Forum.
It was on Harvard Forum, but it
Yeah,
also
it
went to
was.
an email list.
yeah, went through 7 different front porch forums, all the CCSU families, 6 town families. It's on the CCSU website, went out through our Twitter account.
So-
It's on the red website, you can click on it.
yeah.
It's a bunch of different places, but if there's any other suggestions, we can get it out there too.
We'll try to make sure that there's time tonight, because what's nice about it is it's like the 4 slides, and you can see some pretty good responses to it. And I think Ben can make sure that everybody's got access to looking at that link, I'm assuming.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I can send the PDF that, that has the written answers. I have that, and it's gonna continue to grow as more people fill out the survey, but the one I have, I can email it to everyone right now. That's fine.
Well,
There's like 270 different answers I went through this afternoon.
that would be very.
so there's 2
helpful.
pieces, Tom. The survey itself has the actual results from the questions, but then there's a separate section with people's comments. It's really pretty informative as well, in terms of the variety of perspectives.
So if you want to have, or if you're trying to have a hard copy of it, you get it through.
I'll email it to you right now.
Yeah.
I can send it right now.
If you need a hard copy, we'll get one for you.
Is it,
No, I'm not so much thinking about it for myself personally, but I think that this kind of information now absolutely should go to everybody as soon as possible. Even if it's not the area they're in, you know, it's still going to be such valuable information that if we have to change what we're doing,
Yeah.
we're
Well, what Ben's saying is that he can get that information to you immediately. It's, if you want a hard copy, then that's mailing or making something available to you.
I think I'm like, what is for those, who, let's say, read the ethics reporter, is it in there as this survey is available, is it in there in hard copy maybe? So that those who are not linked in through all of these avenues would have the opportunity to know a survey is happening, to even know to request a hard copy. Is that what you were asking?
that.
Oh, you weren't asking for a
That was
hard copy of the
solution.
results, you were asking for a hard copy of the actual survey? The
Right.
survey has been only electronic.
Yeah, but I think that Liz had said they might have a way for folks who are not linked in to be able to complete a survey and return it. I thought that should be.
If we can we come back to the survey?
Yeah.
And I think, Tom, it's a good question, because it's just 2 or 3 days new. And so it's just, I think the response has been good, and we'll make sure that people are getting that information. And I don't want to lose your point, but we'll come back to it. So Article number 5, on transportation. Just want to make sure people's comfort with what the statement is or questions about it. So we've had a lot of discussion about this. And again, the charge is that it becomes the responsibility of the board. But it doesn't mean that you don't have an opinion about what you might think if this were to be go through as a unified union district.
And we will be able to outline this a little more clearly in the preamble or whatever we do in front, just to.
Yeah, I think that that's the meatier part of the conversation.
Yeah.
This, again, is kind of straightforward stuff, but, you know, it might be something where you're saying that the sentiment of the committee is, A, that maybe that the board should have it as a priority for consideration, or there was a real strong sentiment among the committee that pre-K-12 transportation be provided to all students from all communities, and we budgeted for that, and so on and so forth. So, all right? People in favor tentatively of approval of number 5? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? Okay. And so noted on, with Adam's comments, similar to the other qualifiers. So let's move on to Article number 6. The forming districts recognize, the forming districts of the Union District recognize the obligations pursuant to the law, which is Title 16 VSA Statute, Section 261A, paragraph number 1, to establish district-wide curricula and to otherwise standardize the operations within the existing supervisory union boundaries on or before July 1st, 2017. So the point here is the statutory language outlines what the responsibilities are of the board, and basically that the forming district recognize that that's the union district's responsibilities. Brennan.
My question is more practical in nature. As a former board member, I have a little bit of visibility on how much work goes into creating a curriculum.
Yeah.
So is that even feasible in terms of the work that would be required by that date to have a
Well, I would just offer that, I would almost, you can make this analogous to the existing collective bargaining agreements. I'm not sure if you're necessarily going to go out and create something brand new. You're working on building upon or further developing the curriculum that you have in place between the systems as they exist currently.
But this doesn't tie the future board to say, on July 1st, 2017, we will deliver a full pre-K-12 curriculum.
I would say not, but I'll defer to the
I
attorney.
generally agree with Brian. The caveat I give is that they have that obligation, whether it's in the articles or not.
Right.
Just like Chittenden Central right now has this obligation. And each supervisory union in the state does. I'm happy, Brennan, to look at the language and see whether or not it can be tweaked a little bit. Again, this is both a combination of a throwback in the union statutes, the creating union statutes in the 60s, but it's also a requirement that was added to supervisory unions in the last 15 years to force them to really try to standardize and have a uniform curriculum.
And I recognize that both districts now they meet this obligation. I guess what concerns me is the people whose responsibility it would be is to make it unified. And so, if that's not really as big a concern as I'm thinking it might be, then I'm happy to move on.
Good. You get some more?
No, I'm all set.
Martha?
So I'm concerned about that last phrase, within existing supervisory union boundaries. Should it say existing supervisory union and whatever Essex Town is called? Yeah, that sounds like Essex Town isn't part of it at all.
That was my question too.
Definitely not interested in becoming an SU, just saying.
Here's a
Fun
district, right?
Yes.
So Martha, I can tweak the language. I understand the issue that you're talking about.
Good. That's all.
Yeah.
I just think it's not.
Good point. Kim?
My question was exactly the same. What does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah, because it would seem like this would be within the supervisory district. And
It's
they're actually synonyms. really, in terms of responsibilities, the way the law is set up, but it would be confusing.
Well, we're combining an SU and an SD, so they both have to be part of the one.
So I think if I were gonna rewrite it right now, I'd probably just come up here and I'd strike this phrase up to the comma here, to establish district-wide curriculum and otherwise standardize their operations on or before July 1, 2017.
Great.
All right, so hearing Chris's edited version,
Yeah, can we vote on the editing?
are people okay with tentative approval of this article? Thumbs up, edited.
As edited.
Thumbs down? All right, good. We're going to go to article number 11.
And can capture the edits for you in
Yes.
minutes, or is it a live document that you should be editing?
We could do the editing, but I'm assuming you're working with, they're included in the minutes. All right. We scroll up to 11 then. Thank you. So number 11. My suggestion is understand the language and don't worry about the date. That the date would still be something that you're going to be deciding on in terms of when you're going to do this piece. But how it reads is the proposal forming the union district will be presented to the voters of each forming district on a certain date. The candidates of the new school board, or new district board of school directors will be elected on the same date as required by law. And then it goes into the other language about what that process is. Nominations for the office of union school director representing any district or town shall be made by filing with the clerk of that school district or town proposed as a member of the union. A statement of nomination signed by at least 30 voters in that district or 1% of the legal voters of the district, whichever is less, and accepted in writing by the nominee. The statement shall be filed not less than 30 nor more than 40 days prior to the date of the vote. Questions? Keely, Martha, Marla.
Can we add a comma?
Don't go away, Chris.
Can we add a comma after less, or is this normal legal English?
You could add a comment after that.
Marla? Martha? I'm sorry. Let's go to Martha, then go to Marla.
As this is written, it doesn't seem to allow for at-large voting. So I think we need to put an asterisk by it, because until we have a discussion of the at-large versus not at-large voting for any, or all, or some portion of the board members.
Okay. Good. Marla?
When we do the final approval of these articles on June 30th, would we know the date by then? Are we going to be talking?
Yes. I would think that that's going to be part of your discussion for the final night, is making some decisions about what will be the dates for as you move forward. Both in terms of the start of your new operation, if you will, as well as your voting dates. So this does, it doesn't necessarily reflect your conversation last week about at-large versus proportional membership of the board. So, Keely.
Would the process of getting a statement of nomination filed with the clerk differ if it were at large?
My recollection from last week with Chris is that if you were to go at large, then that 30 voters for the district could come from any community, or the 1% would represent 1% of the voters from all of those communities.
Correct.
So does this language does this get impacted at all by that?
I think the language would need to be slightly altered, but not dramatic.
And you would still file with the clerk of your home town or district?
Problem is, there isn't a clerk, a clerk that you could file with someone else. So once the district was formed, if you did at-large voting, you file the nomination form with the clerk of the district. But in the interim, for this vote, it would, I think, need to be with any of the town clerks or the village clerk.
So I don't want to make any assumptions about that. If we got Chris that can tweak the language, let's have Chris tweak the language, and by the time we get to it again, we should have had a conversation about board composition and your process that you want to use in terms of whether or not you want to use a proportional assignment of board members or an at-large or something other than that.
Well, if we're not going to do any at-large candidates, then this language is fine, right?
Yes.
So I would just, put an asterisk there and say, it's okay depending on what we decide in the two previous articles.
Well, let's do this. Are people thumbs up if what you were voting on was proportional representation, not at large, are people good to go with this?
Yes.
Okay, so we can have that reflected in the minutes. Anybody opposed to that? No? Good. Article 13. The Union School District Board of School Directors shall propose annual budgets in accordance with the legal statutes, and then the annual budget shall be conducted by Australian ballot. So this is pretty straightforward, and the decision is whether or not you wish to go Australian ballot or not.
Is that changing, already the three districts not doing Australian ballot?
I believe all of
All three
the
are now
districts
Australian
Australian ballot.
Correct? Okay. Keely?
So I have a question about everything. Do we need to specify what year the first budget vote would be conducted for?
You have that in other language. But, good.
It exists elsewhere, but I would urge you not to include it any more than it presently exists. If for some reason, you're gonna have a transitional grant of $150,000. If for some reason, after the new board was formed, they determined that they needed $300,000 to operate the year before they start operations, they're gonna need to be able to go to the voters and get a budget. So you don't wanna have an article that has language that would restrict them from doing that. I don't think that's going to happen, but if an emergency or some circumstance existed, I don't think you'd want to preclude them from doing that.
You can do it on or before.
So the language right now talks about them preparing an FY18 budget, which is the first budget that they would have to prepare for full operations.
And that's in Article 12, which we will come back. Mark?
Brian, if this is a matter at this stage of the game, whether or not a date is identified when the vote occurs, I don't know. We vote in April, I don't know when Westford votes, which.
So I don't know whether it was at the last meeting or one of the other meetings, I identified for you that if the new district is formed, the vote takes place, the process real quickly is that the Secretary of Education receives notification that the voters approved it. The Secretary notifies the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State at that point issues a notice that fundamentally says this new union is a body politic, it's a municipal corporation. The Secretary of Education then has to convene a organizational meeting of the district. At that organizational meeting under state law, the voters who show up at that meeting decide when the annual meetings will be held.
Thank you. Martha?
So I can't resist. I miss town meetings, I miss voting budgets from the floor. I'm not suggesting we change this, but I think everyone should understand that if this new district were formed and the voting is by Australian ballot, voters within that district could petition to go back to voting for you. That's right.
Correct.
And the voters also are provided by law an opportunity at a public hearing on the budget prior to that budget vote, so that there is a formal opportunity for people to participate in a budget hearing. as well. Whether or not people choose to come or not, it's different than town meeting, but that's part of the legal requirements. So, okay? All those in favor of Article 13, tentatively? All right, anybody not? All right. And Article 14, on July 1, 2017, when the Union District becomes fully operational and begins to provide educational services to students, the Essex Junction, Essex Town, Essex Union High School, and Westford School District shall cease educational operations and shall remain in existence for the sole purpose of completing any outstanding business not given to the Union District under these articles and state law. Such business shall be completed as soon as practicable, but in no event any later than December 31st, 2017. We talked last week about the date that Chris had selected here in terms of December 31st. We can spend some more time on that. And we have some qualifications if we ended up doing some modification because of advisability. Brendan?
Is CTE included in this article?
CTE is part of the Union High School District.
Tom?
Can you give me any example of what wouldn't be handed off to the new Union District that would be left outstanding?
So the school districts, the member school districts would have been operating on June 30th of that year. Someone needs to approve their audits and act upon their audits. The generally accepted view is that that's not an appropriate act for the Union District to do, but the audit should go to the former school board and those directors. That's one example.
And those audits would likely take at least the beginning of the fall to get done anyway. Grant, what's your timeline normally with that?
Audits aren't due until, audits aren't due to the AOE until the spring, actually, so it would be beyond December 31st. We usually don't have final audits done in CCSU by that date.
By December 31st.
Correct. And it always goes into at least January for us.
We usually do.
So the reason, let me just share why I picked December 31st, is the sooner you end the responsibility of the old boards, the sooner they go out of business. The longer they continue, they still have to function as a board, i.e., in the spring of 2017, if those 18, if those boards are still in existence, they have to elect new school board directors. They have to hold an annual meeting. All those things need to take place because they are still in existence. So the sooner they can be shut down from candidly, an administrative management perspective, I think that easier it is on everyone, and it's also less confusing to the voters and your citizenry.
Marla?
So in other words, something like an audit, they would have to speed it up and have it done before that December date.
So if I had the capability to plan that last audit so that that audit was completed and delivered to the school district by November 15th, that's what I do. Because literally, if you go into the spring, those districts are going to have to continue to do everything they do now relative to meetings, all of those kinds of things will need to occur. Martha?
So I think we need to ask Grant, is it feasible?
I'll say
I think it's possible. A lot of this has to do with, there's only so many audit firms out there, and so I think this is going to be something we have to talk to our independent auditors to see if we can get bumped up earlier in the calendar. I think it's possible that we could be wrapped up by then. I'd feel a little more comfortable if it was maybe a month more, but if you want to leave it there, I think it's something we can certainly work hard to try to make happen.
Are your audits completed historically after the 1st of January by the auditing firm?
Our audits are usually finalized after December 31st, probably in the month of January. But we can certainly try to see if we can get that moved.
Maybe you try our audit firm. I don't know, we always get ours in the fall, but I know we just got one, so.
Well, this may also be one of the more complex audits that may be coming across the street.
Yeah.
Are people okay with some further discussion coming on this date, knowing what the language is? That basically the intent is that, the language itself is that there is going to come a point when all your systems are going to stop while the school system, this newly developed school system is going to go on. Keelan?
Does CCSU need to be mentioned, or is that not relevant here?
Say that again?
Does CCSU need to be mentioned as one of the things that's gonna shut down?
No. No. It does not.
Because it's not.
I mean, they have board meetings and stuff.
So, but it's not a municipal corporation, it's an administrative entity created by the state of Vermont, by the Agency of Education.
And it doesn't have audits or other business?
It does have audits and other business, but it isn't a municipal corporation that you need to address in this language.
Who would oversee those audits then?
Say that again?
Who would oversee the audit of CCSU?
So, the CCSU audit can be reviewed by those member districts, which will still be in operation as of that date.
So they would do it in mass versus their representation to a union board?
Correct.
Marla?
In that language, Westford would be advisable. So does the language need to reflect that? Because it's saying, when it becomes fully operational and begins to provide da-da-da-da, and Westford School District shall cease educational operations?
Quick answer is
What
no.
happens if Westford doesn't vote to be?
If Westford doesn't vote, they're not bound by the terms of this agreement legally.
Right, so that doesn't matter.
So it doesn't matter. Otherwise, what you'd literally have to do, anytime you mention Westford, you'd have to have a comma if they approve or if they vote yes. So you don't have to do that, Martha. Legally, it's very clear.
Okay. Article 14, with the qualifiers, thumbs up? Okay, good. And Article 18. There's really a rhyme and reason to this here. Article 18, the Union School Board shall provide opportunity for local input on policy and budget development. Structures to support and encourage public participation within the Union District will be established by the Union District Board of School Directors on or before June 30th, 2017. You know, it says 2015, it's really 2017.
So if some of you were wondering why this is here, it's here for two reasons. One, it is required under the red language. So if you were formed as a red, you have this obligation. The second is that I think over the last 10 years, one of the thoughts that's really emerged from trying to form school districts is that this is frequently one of the concerns that communities have, which is, so how am I going to get my policy input? If I want to talk to people about the budget, what are you going to do about the budget? Are you going to have meetings in the various towns, et cetera, relative to the budget while it's being formed? How are policies going to be developed, et cetera? And the language essentially is saying it's an obligation of the board to develop those structures and address that concern.
Questions? comments? Thumbs up if you're good to go with it? All right, any thumbs down? All right, thank you. 17, for at least one full school year following voter approval, students will attend elementary school and middle school according to the town or district of residency. After the first year, the Union District Board of School Directors will have the authority to adjust school attendance boundary lines and school configurations within the boundaries of the Union District. Want to give a little context, Chris, on that one?
So the context essentially is one, this is a placeholder, from my perspective, just to raise the issue with you. The second is, if you form as a red, you do need to address this issue. The language that's here and using essentially a time frame of 1 year is again just a placeholder. So in part, the idea is to give families, parents, a sense of some stability when this is formed. The Apple Card isn't going to change immediately. It may not change at all, but at the same time say to the board, look, for 1 year, you need to maintain school attendance, but after that, maybe you're going to decide that you want to readjust how students attend the various schools. You may want to permit some level of school choice within the new district and let parents opt for a school. The new district board might decide, you know, we want to do what Burlington's done. We want to take one of our elementary schools and turn it into an arts academy or a science academy or something like that, and permit parents the opportunity to say, gee, that's the elementary school I'd like my son or daughter to attend. Marla?
Because it says for at least one full school year following voter approval, let's say we went out to vote in November of 2015, wouldn't we want it to be one full school year after the formation, just to give people that sense that their kids are going to be in the same school?
So it should be after the first year of operation.
Operation.
After,
In
For
the
at least
second
one
sentence, after the first year of operation.
of operations.
And that operational date is your target date of July 1, 2017. Just to
The first clause
restate that.
is also, as well as the after the first year. It's the first. Like, instead of
Following
saying
the
following
voter
voter
approval.
approval, you
Yeah, I would
said
agree
following
with-
formation of
It
the
would be
district.
Right.
one full year on the operation date.
So there's
Well,
actually
yeah,
not a
yeah,
problem
that's
with the first sentence at all, because that's what's going to happen with the existing districts, right?
Yes.
So you approve this, let's say you approve this either in November or in March. For at least one full year following voter approval, those kids are still going to be attending school in their current districts. So,
And so is the point that it's kind of an 18, 20-month process and more than one full year. So it's not clear to you.
So is what you're saying that what we mean by saying this, the second sentence begins with after July 1st, 2017, the Union District Board of School Directors may adjust things?
I think what you're saying is that after the first year of full operation, so July 1, 2018.
July 1, 2018.
In
the
that
board would have
case, the
discretion.
first sentence is not accurate,
Right.
because it would be at least 2 school years from voter approval.
Yeah, it's at least overlapping, yeah.
It's easy to fix.
But we
Easy
can work
to
that.
fix if you
If you like
if
the
you
idea.
support the concept, we
Well, we-
can clearly tailor the language to
Just
address.
as long as we understand which concept we're supporting.
So the concept is that until July 1, 2018, students attend the school based on their residency. During the first year, it is their town/school district residency based on the existence of their current districts. In the second year, it's based on their residency within the Union School District.
And whatever that board decides.
No, in the second year, the board would still be bound during its first year of operation, that kids would be going to that district of residence.
No, after July 1st, 2008.
Correct, correct,
The board would not be bound,
correct.
whether it chooses to do anything, but they're not bound.
Right,
Yeah,
that'd be the
so
whole
we can-
reason.
yeah.
So, there are situations every year where somebody moves from the town to the junction, either unknowingly or knowingly. And you may have a situation where a seventh grade family is moving to the junction. Now, despite the fact we're all one equalized pupil pool, we're gonna make that kid go to the junction by this article, rather than allow for the, whomever the governing person might be in it, and it would not be a board, it would be the superintendent or whomever, to allow the student to stay till 8th grade when they would then go to the high school. I feel like that's pretty binding and not allowing for common sense exceptions.
I would operate that would still be business as usual. This is about adjusting school attendance boundary lines and school configurations on a more global scale.
That question came up last week, and I answered it the same way Brian answered it, which is the existing exceptions that come up just the way they are today, and continue, that the board would continue to have the flexibility to address those. That this language talks about basic enrollment and attendance based on the boundaries.
So the concept is still that kids are staying in their schools through July 1, 2018 is the first year that the board can change those boundaries if they want. Gil?
I like this idea of stability, but I feel like we are kind of tying hands in a way if we're asking a new board to develop a transportation plan and then institute possible school choice, which might necessitate an entirely different transportation plan a year later. That would make their life much more difficult than if they had the authority to develop those two things in unison.
Okay.
Why would the transportation plan change if you still, everything's still in the
If you-
same school?
Well, what I'm saying is that if this board on July 1st, 2018 decides to take advantage of its ability to adjust attendance boundary lines or have a farm academy at Westford, and now suddenly you've got kids who you've promised transportation from Essex Town who now go to school in Westford,
Yeah, but
you'd be
isn't
suddenly needing to change all your bus
school
routes.
choices meaning that you have transportation to get to it?
Say that again, Sam?
Isn't, if you choose to have school choice, that means that you can be transported there by your own family or you.
Not in Burlington, right? They provide the same busing service.
No,
It's city buses.
Right, but they pay for city buses for all
Right,
students to
but
get
it's not
anywhere.
impacting the city buses.
No, but I'm saying this would suddenly throw a wrench in whatever,
No, I mean, school choice, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think school choice is if you apply for it, that's knowing that you have to.
this would be an entirely different type of school choice. Right.
Well, the
This
other-
is saying that people from Westford, instead of going to Westford, could go to Essex Junction and vice versa.
If they have a ride.
But if you're on the same district, then we would provide a bus.
Yeah.
So I
And you
understand,
get
I
through next
understand,
month.
I understand the point you're raising, but maybe I'm missing it, but
That's not what this article is.
if the board is going to adjust boundaries, even if they have previously looked at the transportation and said, we don't think there's a problem, but now they begin to say, we're going to take a third of the students from the village, and we're going to have them attend a school in the town because of enrollment issues, or offering parents a different choice, they're going to have to revisit transportation at that point and make a determination about it. So don't think this ties the board's hands. It gives them flexibility, and if they exercise that flexibility, they're going to have to consider a variety of factors when they do
Just
that.
saying that it doesn't make sense to allow them flexibility in that area only 1 year after they have flexibility to craft everything else about their education program.
So the, you know, I think the question is, do you provide any stability to parents about this when they go to vote and have some sense about, so is the world gonna turn upside down on me immediately? And that's the purpose of the article. From a legal standpoint, it's not critical. It's really an issue in terms of, so do you wanna provide parents stability about where their kids are going to go to school or not? You could eliminate the article.
I mean, I would say put the "we're not closing Westford School" article way above this one, like, in terms of things that parents want stability in.
My read on this, Keely, a little bit would be if you are giving the board the opportunity in its planning year to redo the configuration and the boundaries for where kids go to school, I think you'd be challenged by your public that would be a very threatening thing for many parents, would be my guess, that I'm voting on something, but I don't know where my kid's going to school. What this is saying is that we're maintaining the status quo with the qualifiers that you raised in terms of there will be exceptions to that for what's right for kids that we already do as practice now. But after you get to that July 1, 2018, the board would have that opportunity. And yes, it'll be doing other things that first 16, 18 months with negotiated contracts, looking at the transportation system, figuring out a budget, dealing with all their hirings. So where would this stand on that list in terms of reconfiguring? Probably a low priority for the board for that first year as well. That's just a personal perspective on all else stepping outside my boundaries here. Go ahead, Kim.
I know Chittenden East in their first year offered, maybe we check what their language was, I don't recall what their article language was, but they offered voluntary choice, allowing them to have better balance on their class sizes, and that allowed them not to hire a new teacher or dismiss a teacher in another building. And that is happening in their first year. As I read this article, it feels as though that would not be even something to be considered or discussed. And so I'm wondering if there isn't language that provides the assurance that the standard operating procedure is going to be, there, you won't be required to switch schools by a different configuration, but there may be the opportunity to consider something.
I would let Chris weigh in, but I would say the difference between boundary lines and school configuration. So you're going to change a K-5 school, or you're going to change a K-3 school to a K-6 as a change in configuration. You're going to say kids who live in this neighborhood are now going to go to this school. So the issue about creating some availability and choice because we're overcrowded in one school and not crowded at all in another, there's nothing I don't think that would preclude the administration or the board to say, we would like to offer the opportunity for 15 volunteers to say we want to have our kids go to Westford that day. That to me would not be confined or restrictive. And I don't know if Chris would agree with my interpretation of that. So I hear what you're saying in terms of that there may be those, but to me that's not dealing with boundary of school configurations. That's creating some sensible balance and giving people opportunity. How they choose to do that, if they were to do it by saying we're going to now have these kids go to that school because we're going to redraw the boundary lines, is different than offering a voluntary option for people and see who takes it.
The language in Chittenden East isn't any good.
It's that language.
It's that
They were
language.
allowed to do that.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Exactly.
The other thing about this article, just to come back to something we talked about before, but that the board of school directors, once they're in office, has the power to change this article if they deem that it's necessary or appropriate. If they have to do that in the best interest of the district, they have the authority to do that.
I'm having trouble with the fact that that first sentence says will. I don't think that allows flexibility.
I would agree with that.
Just like shall and long.
come up with so many exceptions already that we're going to allow either superintendent or board to make a decision on offering exceptions to an article in there. It just feels as though it could then feel arbitrary because one says yes, the other one says no, or this person got it approved and this one didn't, and it's saying you won't approve that.
So I think the question is, conceptually, what do you want? I don't have a stake in this personally at all, one way or the other. So the question is, do you want something? Do you want to provide some assurance to parents? If you want to provide some assurance to parents, do you want the language to be less constrictive, less mandatory than some of you perceive it? And if that's the case, I can draft language that achieves that goal.
You know, one of the, just eyeballing some of the responses that are coming into the survey, this is a common theme that comes up. You know, will my kid have to change schools? You're forcing me to change schools. You know, so it is coming up as a concern. And not that we're trying to address every one of those concerns in the articles, but it will have to be addressed at some point by the committee, whether it's part of the report or preamble, or whether it's in an article like this one.
Tommy, and then we'll go to
It just seems like a no-brainer. I mean, if people are upset that their kids have to attend the same school that they're attending, and then they vote this down, their kids will attend the same school they're attending. I mean, I don't understand the issue.
Okay. Linda?
Did you call on me?
Yes, I did.
I'm a little confused about this too. You said to me that the board, the new board, could actually change this?
Yes.
Yes. You know, I can think of a lot of reasons why that article would cause me to vote down. For example, in my family, there's a child who has an excellent daycare situation, or after-school care situation. Parents can't pick him up because they both work. He's in a safe, good place. If somebody changed him, he couldn't go to that daycare again. And I've been for this whole thing. I voted down for that. Because what do you do with it? Put him out in the lawn and raffle him off? You know, I think this thing has to be very clear. Parents worry about their kids, particularly after school when they can't be there, to make sure that they're okay. And this would be a real problem for me as a parent or to my grandson's mom.
And would you keep that language as it is?
I would say that for this extended period of time, children will, the status quo in terms of school assignment will remain the same. Now that gives parents a year and a half to figure out something new.
If they need to, and the board may choose not to do anything different.
That's right.
And you still may have choice, and you still may have exceptions to the rules because somebody moved or some other situation.
That's right, but I would also want something in there that would indicate that the new board or somebody would be concerned or would listen and try to be helpful in the event that changes really screwed up the family situation. I don't know if you can do that. Maybe legally you can't tie the board's hands, but...
Well, I think, again, that becomes part of what's the statement you want to have go with your articles to share some of the perspectives that you've talked about as a committee that are important issues.
Yeah,
That being one of them. Yeah.
that would be something that I think people might be very concerned about, so I think I have to be very firm about it.
Heidi, then we'll come back tomorrow.
I was just going to say, could there be some sort of wording where, you know, it's status quo unless you want to have a choice of some sort? I don't, but that's the whole idea behind the article. Status quo, you could remain for the first year if you want to, unless you choose not to, somehow.
I think go back to Chris's question, so what's the concept that you want to have presented? And is it flexibility or is it stability? And so let's go to the questions here.
The main thing of making sure parents feel that their kids are going to remain in the same schools. In the village of Essex Junction, we've got 2 K through pre-K through 3 schools on 2 separate sides of the village. Westford, the kids all attend one building. Essex Town, I think your K through 2 is one building. So those 2 communities aren't as impacted as in the village if you didn't have something supporting, like Linda's saying, her child goes to one school. She wants to make sure that he can remain at the same daycare. So I think they need that time to feel safe, but from what Chris is saying, it doesn't sound like the board couldn't choose to switch kids if they came to the board and said it's better for my student to be here.
So if people have any ambiguity about that and you feel that there's a need, I can add a sentence that says, either notwithstanding the above, or provided however, the board shall have the authority, based upon the individual needs of a student, to assign the student to another school. Period.
So, without that, can we just change students will attend to students can attend?
I guess my question is, if you make it, like currently, you go to school in your town of residency. So if we change that to can, then I would assume that to mean that a kid that's at Essex Elementary could come over. And I don't know if we want to just open up school choice out of the gate as a. I honestly believe that the new board will not touch this. Because they're gonna have their hands full with so many other things, but that's crystal ball stuff, but.
So we have.
I like it as is.
Okay, well, let's come back to that, and I'm gonna pose the question in terms of as is, tentative agreement, and then what the second one will be, do you want to have Chris work on modifying that language, we'll bring it back. So how about a thumbs up in terms of the language as it's presented here in terms of the article?
Can you just clarify where we saw that there was a problem with 1 year following the vote versus
That'll
first year of
be
operation?
clarified. That'll be
Okay,
clarified.
so
That
we're
is the
saying
July 1,
thumbs up
2018,
with that
yeah.
clarification.
Yeah.
So again, thumbs up with the clarification that this goes into effect July 1, 2018. So thumbs up on that,
We're just thumbs upping that clarification or the whole language of the article?
on the July 1, 2018 clarification only. Okay, thumbs up on that, can you get them higher?
Just the clarification.
Okay? And how about with the additional language that Chris just posed in terms of the additional qualifier, or clarifier, about the notwithstanding clause, thumbs up.
Well, can I just say something?
Sure.
Sorry to prolong this, but Chris's language, I think is problematic because it sounds like the board can decide that Huey's son needs to go over there without Huey having any say in it at all. But what I'm looking for is to assure parents that they want the kids to stay in the school they're in that first year, they can.
Yeah.
But if Essex Town has 15 more kids than they can accommodate, and Westford has 15 empty seats, and there are 15 kids that would be happy to go to Westford, I don't want the board to be constricted by saying they can't go there, you've got to hire another teacher in this district. And I don't know exactly how to say that, but I think that's what Heidi was talking about, that That's what Kim was
So I've
talking about.
heard two different things, Martha, and if there's clarification about what you want, I can draft the language. So I'm hearing there were two concepts that were expressed. One was the first one, you just clarified the second one. The two concepts I've heard are, one, what about the flexibility of the parent being able to say, we've moved, I want our child to attend this school. The second is the district has a need to address overcrowding or enrollment issues at one school, and they have capacity in another school. Does the district have the ability to either A, to transfer students, or to seek parents to volunteer to have their children attend another school?
That's good.
Let's move on. I think what we'll do is bring this one back, if that's okay. I think Chris has got some concepts here, and I want to make sure we get to these other items on the agenda here tonight. So we've still got some conversation, I think, on this, and that's okay. This is good, helpful information. Let's,
It's really, I have a question for Mark, what would clarify how it would be operationally handled? Like, this should not be something that would come as exceptions before a board.
I agree, but I think that there's a mix of perspectives here. Yeah.
Okay, but so I think at some point, whenever this is revisited, that we get input from administrators to have a sense of what reflects current practice in a way that doesn't feel restrictive but allows for the opportunity. So it doesn't have to be this moment, but if that's something you're willing to offer to this stage, that would be great.
We've got a few more we can do. I'm sensitive, Brendan, about grants time and wanting to get to the communication. So we can take a look at Article 12 and maybe do one more here and then get Grant to follow up with his time, and then we can, if we have more time after communications, we can certainly go further into the articles. But I think those two pieces are important to that as well.
I would agree.
So Article 12, and what I would offer for the moment is to ignore the bold print language. I haven't checked in with Mark and Grant. I had a little bit of a conversation with Judy. Chris and I had talked about this today, and rather than confuse it with needing a budget before July 1, 2017-18, I'm just saying ignore that for the moment, and we'll come back with some more information. So essentially, this is saying is that upon an affirmative vote and upon compliance with all of the elements of the creation of a unified union school district, the district shall have and exercise all of the authority which is necessary in order to prepare, so on. The union district shall, between the date of the necessary affirmative votes in June 2017, develop school district policies, adopt curriculum. So this is all going to be the work of that new school board. And prepare for the contractual agreements, set the school calendar for fiscal year 2018, prepare and present the budget for fiscal year 2018, and then prepare for the union district annual meeting and transact any other lawful business. So pretty straightforward stuff. And I'm not trying to rush it. Go ahead, Mark.
Is there another piece to it that's on the next
It's on the
page?
next page.
Yeah.
And this is that line, again, in terms of fully educationally operational. So all of those duties commence as of July 1, 2017.
Did I understand you to say, Brian, that this is giving a new board authority to seek budget, to do those things contractual, everything
All of those
that's
things
there
that precede what's going to
requires
be in place as of
money.
July 1, 2017. Yeah.
And so, do we know if that's a budget for that transition that's put before the voters?
Yeah. My understanding with the transition budget, so after the vote and before July 1, 2017, is that there's a $150,000 grant that would result from an affirmative vote that would be used for the transition. Chris raised the issue about whether there would need to be a budget put together by this new board. prior to that, or do the existing boards, if there's a need, decide that there's going to be money in their budgets that they're presenting to voters for the 16-17 year that could be used and be targeted for the transition year? Is there money that is needed beyond the 150? Somebody's going to have to make a decision, because you can rest assured that Mark, Judy, Grant, and Roger are going to be some lead people doing the transition. Is that going to require additional help? Or is that going to be done as with additional just workload? Or will there be a required budget? And I think that just needs a little bit more conversation internally about what their sense of needs are, and we haven't had all of that discussion. I'm operating, and Mark, feel free, or Grant, but my understanding from the initial conversations was that it was expected that that transitional amount of $150,000 was at least being thought about as an adequate amount to help with the transition. But I don't know if that's kind of the official internal word or not. You guys want to offer, is that?
We're both shaking.
Yeah, okay. All right.
In the same direction.
Yeah, so that it wasn't thought that there was going to be more budget time. These people were just volunteering their time to just do it for the cost.
I think the important resource is time. I mean, it's
Yes.
not the time to do, using the word develop, that just, there's a lot of time that goes into these pieces of work.
And there will be, I mean, this is, again, being part of your discussion. You see that list of what the tasks are, if you can scroll that up again. Those are big time, big ticket items for a new school board. And we've already talked about the curriculum and collective bargaining agreements, but there are other things, including policy, that's going to need to be developed. And that will be some pretty focused work on the part of the board. Martha?
So I have a question about halfway down, it says, prepare for contractual agreements. Would that better say negotiate contractual agreements?
Prepare for contractual agreements, yes. So,
It's just kind of odd language. They don't have.
I'll defer to the author.
I'm not sure,
Well, you may not have authored that
I'm not
one.
sure I came up with the word prepare there. I think it could be negotiate or prepare.
Well, you put prepare there, I wouldn't put for.
Negotiates what we do around that anyway.
I think it's better to say negotiate.
Chris, I see this as not just labor contracts, it's contracts with outside providers, service providers.
Right.
So
It's
all of the
it's
vendors
all
that
sorts-
we
it's all
contract
sorts of
with.
contracts.
So
Prepare works for
This is
me,
where that
because we may not be ready to negotiate, we're just preparing for those negotiations.
So I think you could use the word prepare and negotiate. I probably would not just use prepare, negotiate either, so.
Not to rush.
Do we expect them to share in the 150
What's
for
that?
the 150,000?
What about it?
Do we have to, does this article, does anywhere speak to whom the fiduciaries for that transition money?
I don't think that that's necessary. And if people are feeling that there's no need to get more complicated with a budget before the system becomes operational, I think that that's where I would be landing if people think that that's functional.
So, I know what I mean by fiduciary, what do you mean by fiduciary?
Who is in charge of that $150,000?
The
Who
board,
is determining
the board,
the new board?
the new board.
And
Until that new
they're
board,
writing the checks, or they?
well, I mean, that new board has the ability to either A, to have staff, or B, to turn to Judy and Mark and say, we need some fiscal services, will you handle this? But in terms of a fiduciary duty, the fiduciary duty is with the board.
So it's not apportioned out to the local boards or the local districts for their,
The assumption is that that $150,000 is first and foremost for the new district. It would not preclude the new district from conferring with the forming districts and saying, so you need $10,000 to do X. Okay, that's doable.
Okay. So, Article 12, Keely.
Once again, we don't need to mention CCSU in the final clause because it's not a corporation, even though it has responsibilities and stuff.
I'm sorry, say that once more.
When you go down to the next page, we don't mention CCSU and that's okay? Because even though it has responsibilities, it's not a corporation and we don't need to mention it? Or do we need to mention CCSU?
I don't think so, Keely. I'll give it, I'm happy to give it some thought. I haven't seen, one of these reports, that references the supervisory union in that regard. But I'll give it some thought between now and the next meeting as to whether it's appropriate.
Thanks.
With that qualifier? Thumbs up with that language? All right? Okay, great risk. We'll do one more. If Brendan's okay with that, then we'll bring up, so let's go to Article 2. Let's do something really meaty. So this is who will be provided the education program in this union district, which is your pre-K through grade 12 students, and the qualifications that the Westford students are essentially being grandfathered through that date of June 30th, 2020. So Westford students would be permitted to opt the option to continue to attend the public or approved independent school as tuition students from the union district, except as specifically approved by the board of school directors of the union district. The tuitioning of grandfathered high school students shall cease on June 30th, 2020. Gil.
This question is actually not about Westford. I understand that the intent of the new legislation is that for all students in a given grade in the new district, they'll be receiving their education in the same way. So either we, like, say, we're tuitioning out all ninth graders, Westford and everywhere else, or we're trying to keep them in-house except for Act 77. How does that apply to pre-kindergarten, where we offer some programs at schools and we give some families $3,000 to access schooling elsewhere?
I think that's, I'd say that's dictated by some separate law and regulation requirement. I don't know if you.
I think it's dictated by state statute.
So that's okay.
Regarding pre-K programs.
Yeah.
It's okay that we're not uniform on that?
Well, it's okay now that you're not
Yeah.
uniform on it.
Yeah. It's universal now
As long
that
as we
people are
keep
doing it.
complying with statutes.
Correct.
and
Once the new
Your question?
district is formed, I think that issue would have to be looked at in that context. And I'll tell you, it's I don't know the answer to it off the top of my head, Kelly. I'd have to do some research on it. I've never heard the question come up before, and the whole issue about pre-K and how those services are offered is fairly new in the context of this framework.
It's changed between my two.
Right.
Yeah. And you're still providing, which is the essential question here, is that you're providing that pre-K opportunity in accordance with what are the existing regulations and legislation around that. So then the secondary piece here is kind of the acknowledgement of the grandfathering of the Westford students.
Now,
Jill?
just a question of whether this issue has emerged in the service of.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments about choice and tuition.
Particularly from the Westford.
Westford, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
If not any questions, people with tentative agreement on the grandfathering language and the population of kids, Article 2, all good to go? Any opposed?
I would just say thank you to Chris for figuring out a way to get this into Article
Good, good. Okay, Brendan, if you're good, I'll stop here and we can continue this at our next meeting. And if we have more minutes after we do the grants piece.
Yeah, I think it'd be important to hear from Grant and give him the proper time to put the context around the information that he developed for our last meeting, and then time to talk about the survey briefly and just give people a heads up on where that's at and where we might go next. I think it's important.
And my only piece would be is for our next meeting, if you just take a look at the next set of articles and give that a little bit of review time in advance. But thank you for that. And we'll clean up some of those that are not yet clear. And what's really good is the feedback and the questions that you're raising, assume that they would be asked exponentially within your community. So this is good for you to be raising all these issues. Okay. Graham? Get back to his screen.
Yeah, no problem. So I apologize, last week I tried to throw this out there real fast. We didn't talk much about it, there were no questions, so I'm not sure that you really got the full grasp of what I was trying to do for you on this. So I just wanted to show it again. Whenever George Cormier provided a tax rate modeling, he was looking at FY15 as the base year and projecting forward with a lot of assumptions. At least a few members said it would be useful to go back and look at actual tax rates, which is what this does. The light blue is Westford's actual tax rates from FY12 to 16. The orange is Essex Junction, the gray is Essex Town. So those are, three of these lines on this chart are just actual equalized property tax rates. Then what I did was I looked at what a merged tax rate in yellow, what the merged tax rate would be if we had been forced to combine back in FY12. So if we were forced to combine, there'd be no incentives. So that's why that line is up pretty close to the other actual tax rates. And then I looked at dark blue, and dark blue is if we merged, it was a voluntary merger, and we had the tax rate incentives of 10 cents, 8 cents, 6 cents, 4 cents, 2 cents. So what this is just doing is showing you what the actual tax rates were and what the merged tax rates would be like if we had merged back then. So there are a lot of questions you might have on this. For one, you know, the merged without incentives is lower than Essex Junction and Essex Town tax rates, but not Westford until you get to FY15. And Westford had a lower tax rate, but as their 3.5% loss of equalized pupils has hit every year, they're a little steeper as far as what their tax rates have been doing. And if they lose hold harmless protection, it'll be steeper even still. So that's kind of it. The heading is a little confusing because it's the merged is what's modeled. The actual Essex Town, Essex Junction, and Westford tax rates are actual tax rates. So with this out there, are there any questions that you had looking at this?
Well, a comment by a member of the committee who's not here tonight when he saw this was, well, geez, it wouldn't have saved us much money at all if we had been forced into this back in FY12. And so is your takeaway that if we had actually instituted the merged with incentive in FY12, we would essentially be exactly where we are today?
Yeah, so the merged with incentives is this dark blue, right? So you're lower than all the other tax rates would have been. The variance there is anywhere from 3.6 cents to 5.4 cents. And to put that in context, think of every penny as $10 for $100,000 in property. So 3.6 cents means if you had a $100,000 property and you were paying purely based on property tax, 3.6 cents means your property tax rate would be $36 lower. And if you were, you know, if it's $250,000 of property, then, you know, you would multiply 36 times 2.5. And so that would get you up, I think, around $90. So, I mean, it's a matter of perspective. To me, that's a significant amount. And I think if you look at George's modeling, it's actually fairly close to this, which is interesting because his assumptions were a lot different. So what you see here is you're not making assumptions about what might the base tax rate be, what might the equalized pupil count do, because that's already here, those are actuals, they've already been factored in. And in George's projection going forward, he wasn't making those kinds of assumptions. You'll see that between 13 and 14 and then 14 and 15, that the angles are a lot steeper. Well, that's because from 13 to 14, the base tax rate went up 5 cents. From 14 to 15, it went up 4 cents. And then you see, wow, from 15 to 16, we did pretty good. Well, that's because the base tax rate only went up 1 cent. So those are knowns in this projection. So I think that's what you were looking for, and hopefully that makes sense to you. Well,
So these modeled property tax rates, this graphing, is the way it was 2012 to now, and then the dark blue, the bottom one, is if it was with the tax incentives.
yeah, and the gold is if we had merged, but we didn't get any incentives.
Okay, and so that didn't include any assumptions of any savings.
Actually, it does.
It
The
does.
merged, it merged without incentives, merged with incentives. The only thing I plugged in there was what we projected for savings, and I used the same assumptions that George used, except I phased them in over time. For example, in year 1, I only have $86,000 worth of savings. In year 2, this is factoring in $400,000 worth of savings. Year 3 is $900,000, and year 4 is just over $1 million, which is the full savings, and then that carried forward into FY16. The last slide that's included here shows how I phased in the savings. So, like I said, 86,000, 400,000, those are the numbers that I factored in as far as merged without and merged with. And I think what's interesting here is you think about voluntary merger versus non-voluntary merger. This is what it might look like. If you don't voluntarily merge, this is kind of the tax rates you would be looking at. If we do voluntarily merge, these are the tax rates you're looking at. Now, yes, in FY17, whenever we lose that last 2 cents incentive, then really the gold line and the blue line become the same thing. But you're still below where we are today by at least $0.015 to 3.5 cents almost. So it's still worth doing even if you didn't get incentives, but looking at this, you certainly want to get the incentives because that makes a big difference. That's another thing too. This blue line, you see, wow, that's going up at a lot higher of a rate. So what's going on with that? Well, that's because you lose 2 cents worth of incentives here, 4 cents, 6 cents, 8 cents. You're losing 2 cents of incentive. That's why eventually that gold and blue line combine, because in year 6 you have no incentives.
So this is also assuming that over this 5-year period, let's just say that this scenario actually occurred, that a unified board wouldn't have found more savings
Correct.
than the savings that have initially been identified.
Correct. And I would say that the savings that are on page 3, I would say that those are fairly conservative. I would hope that we do find more efficiencies and can operate at a higher rate of efficiency by the time we get out to year 6. So this was just trying to be consistent with the total savings that was used with George's assumptions. So yeah, I mean, obviously, it doesn't go into the value of education and what we're doing for kids and all those things. This is just looking at what tax rates would look like with the same assumptions, but modeled against historical tax rates instead of future. And I won't go into it, but there are notes here that you can read through. I probably covered most of them. But this is a link under your other resources for tonight, and I think probably for last week. I also did income sensitivity modeling, but really all I did here was whatever kind of tax rates reductions we were seeing on property taxes. I just applied the same percentages to this because the law says that income sensitivity will be adjusted accordingly. And so to me, that means if property taxes, if under this, property tax rates were 5% lower, then so would your income sensitivity be 5% lower.
So on income sensitivity piece, do we know how many people in the communities pay by income sensitivity versus property tax? Like, do we know?
Probably about 2/3 of the people, or not 2/3, probably about 1/3 of the people would pay purely based on property. 2/3 pay based on property with an income sensitivity factored in.
Okay.
Do you think that's safe to say, about 2/3, 1/3?
Well, that's safe, but anybody who is income sensitized and has less than 2 acres or less would pay purely.
Yes.
But it's just, so generally, I think a lot of people in Essex Junction who are income sensitive are paying the income sensitivity rate, right? Because they're not gonna have more than 2 acres. In the town that's gonna do a mix, in Westford, nobody has just 2 acres.
So if this leads to other questions, and once again, I apologize for trying to rush through this last week. I wanted to get it to you because I thought it was something you had requested, but I probably should have just waited until there was a little more time. But if you come up with more follow-up questions to this, then just.
Are there any questions right now that folks have, or observations?
Could you just scroll up to the assumptions page again?
You mean the savings?
Yeah, the savings page at the bottom.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I'm not trying to be coy, but I'm not saying the specific people that we kind of modeled. Rest assured, we didn't say we were going to take all, I think somebody made reference to this was all of Essex Town Central. It's not. Two biggest assumptions we made were that we were going to go from 2 superintendents to 1, from 2 business managers to 1. I didn't really want to go into every position that we were looking at because there's just no need to get into that anxiety right now with each individual position. But we did look at staffing in both central offices and what one central office would look like and where we thought some savings would be. Miscellaneous is just economies of scale. So if I'm doing a transportation, a busing contract for all of these 4,000 students instead of just, 1,000 students, I might be able to get a better price. Same thing for paper and anything like that, any kind of contracting service. And the transportation, I should be very clear on that. The assumption is that we are contracting out bus service, not that we are buying buses, leasing buses, paying drivers, or employing drivers. This was just that it might take us another 9 buses that we would have to contract with some provider for. And I used the number, or Roger and I used the number that was similar to what Essex Township negotiated for their last contract.
And that's an important point because Al Bombardier mentioned last week the higher prices of the buses, and that's different than the assumptions that they built in. So exactly what Grant is saying is that the $45,000 or $46,000 that was built into the bus was based on that was a leasing arrangement, not a purchase. If you were looking at a purchase plus, you'd be paying a lot more money each year for that.
I have a question while you're here, Grant, put you on the spot. Because the Essex Reporter reported out a lot of what Al had to say, and he was talking about cash on hand in the districts and the, if schools have to do any major renovations. And when I was thinking of cash on hand, I know in our district, cash on hand, it depends what time of year you're going to take. I mean, sometimes we look good, and other times all of a sudden the bills have come in. So cash on hand, just to use that terminology, is misleading. The other thing is if we need to do roof, let's say the high school needs to do a roof like he talked about, Essex Junction and Essex Town, we already own U46, so we're going to be spending the money anyways. And I just had a hard time with the Essex Reporter just pulling that piece out, and they didn't talk to anybody else or financial managers.
And the intent is that we'll have more detail on those financial pieces at our next meeting. That's one of the things we wanted to do, was to take a little bit more time on the assets, the liabilities, the building values, and also the fund balance, which Al had raised in terms of how does that money work, and the reserve funds that might be available. So Grant and Roger George have been working on that.
Linda?
I understand we're not ready to make a full report, but it would seem to me, when somebody raises issues like that, which sound very sensible but may not be valid, that it would be a good thing for this committee or somebody attached to this committee to respond to that. No big, just as Marla said, cash on hand varies from month to month or from semester to semester, and the roof on the high school's got to be repaired, whether it belongs to Westford, Essex Junction, and Essex Town, or whether it belongs, it stays the same. I think those kinds of things need to be addressed immediately because they stick in people's minds, and then they get a lot of other stuff that's negative.
That's a suggestion. And we talked about the transportation piece, because I had that one in my head from last week, that I didn't believe it was an accurate statement, and we confirmed that today, so we'll get a response back.
And next week, we are, as Brian mentioned, we were asked to come back with some slides on fund balance, reserve funds, assets and liabilities. So Roger and I will come in with maybe 7 or 8 slides to just talk about that. And I think what you're going to hear from us is a lot of the information that we're going to share with you may not really be that relevant for this discussion, and we'll try to explain what we mean by that, but I don't want to get too far into that.
Are you bringing capital plans as well?
I have capital plans in there, but realize capital plans all look different. Westford, as you know, didn't even have one a few years ago. Now they have probably the most extensive. Essex Town has a list of a lot of things that are kind of interests that are coming up, but they're not phased by year. Essex Junction and U46 are fairly similar. So you will see what we kind of have for capital plans now. But, I mean, the bottom line is all the schools have some capital needs.
But I think one of the ways to frame it is how much money is already in each district's budget to pay for capital needs each year. You know, we need a driveway, but we have been budgeting already X number of dollars a year for capital. So it isn't going to like bump up the new district's budget just because we put a driveway in Westford.
Right. And I think everybody's been trying to responsibly budget for capital needs, with the one possible exception of the roof, which is too big, and we probably end up doing a bond for that whenever we need to do it.
But you might pay off the bond with money that you
We have other
have
bond
already
payments that are coming
budgeted.
down
Right.
that would make up for that. Right.
So I think we have to figure out a way to frame that, because, you know, I'll just speak for Westford. If people in Westford say, oh, you're gonna have to pay $600,000 for a high school roof, you know, and that's gonna jack the budget of this new district way up. I think we have to find a way of framing it to say that's not how it works.
And that can be a dicey one for folks, but in terms of your public, and you're back to the explanation that if you choose to move forward, you're making a decision about our children in our communities, and you're under one roof here, no pun intended. But that's going to be part of the discussion. But we save that, and we save the articles that deal with assets and liabilities and the $1 purchase price and so on, until you got a chance to look a little bit more at this information, so people were a little bit more informed about what you'd be getting into in terms of what is the price of engagement in terms of from a facility and maintenance standpoint. Marla?
Grant, the cost benefit analysis, you were probably involved in putting this together. There
That's some of
was
the narrative pieces that
Yeah, yes, I put some bullets in there.
just, are we going to be able to give feedback to have additions to this? Like under transportation, I don't know if you consider it a cost benefit, but the congestion of traffic is getting worse and worse for Summer Street and Fleming. So parents are now saying to me they want to consider transportation.
And that
So,
cost
I
benefit-
mean,
That cost benefit analysis, at first I was thinking that was just dollars, but I mean, that's curriculum, that's special education, that's everything. And I'm not sure, were you gonna have cost benefit analysis?
Yeah, we've got that as part of the next week's discussion.
Oh,
So we're
okay.
gonna go through that whole cost benefit document as well as looking at the assets, liabilities, and fund balance and those kinds of reserve funds.
And there probably are a lot of edits you could make to that, sure.
And the one with that was that, again, that's been an internally worked document in terms of really looking for staff to provide some talking points, if you will. And we've had enough conversation in here the last few months that also to have committee input onto that as to what might be important points, because those will be used, because you're being asked, if you're going to do the red, to provide a cost-benefit analysis as part of the articles being submitted to the state.
I was just going to say that I appreciate looking historically and taking those 5 years and overlaying a phased-in set of efficiencies or whatever it was, so that's why I was looking a little more closely at the being able to explain the assumptions, because I think that's going to be important for this work to be considered credible. I wonder, since the information that's out there already is this can save $1.3 million, and that was the headline, how we, my concern as I read that was, this doesn't necessarily feel like it'd be very hard for people to start poking holes at this and question the credibility of all the work. And so, to what extent can we use historical modeling as our platform for conversation around what this looks like, and or can we redo the previous modeling to at least assume certain things around like salary increases for teachers, or the allowable increases that we get at 2% a year. So the modeling that was done by George did not assume any growth in budget, which could not be a more flawed assumption, unless we know our class sizes are big and we know we're not closing schools. So we know we have labor increases that amount to 80% of our budget, increasing at whatever the prevailing comp is. And we also know we're bound by certain caps that we now know what they are, 2% or less for all of our communities. So if we need to go out with that version, I think we really need to fix George's assumptions to reflect some version of reality. If we can do this, to me that seems cleaner, but I would think somebody's going to also want
Yeah, and we spent some time on this last week.
I apologize.
There's another document, no, it's fine, because what we had last week was the half a dozen variables that
Okay.
you're familiar
Okay.
with that can be tweaked. What Grant's been able to provide you is that in the cases of his slides, it's the actual variables that have been, they're known. So the part of it that Grant raised was that the growth in the base tax rate going from 4 and 5 cents, after going through 4 years of actually going down a penny, it was 87, 87, 86, and then 89. Well, to figure that in the out years is the challenge, because we followed that up with George and Grant and Roger and the superintendents about the work that it would take to model these different possibilities. So you've got your increase in your education spending, a decline in your enrollment, an increase in your base tax rate, maybe a slight increase or no increase in the base amount. So all of those things can be played with, but it's going to be difficult to say that this is a real life scenario. What you can do is say, here are how those variables changed over the last 5 years, here's how it would have impacted. And yes, you may only save $36 on your on your home as opposed to $360, which you were really hoping for. But if there are other factors that are going to get tweaked at the state level, you don't have any control over those.
But I get what you're saying. I think there's a lot of it has to do with what is going to be for the consumption of people who are going to be voting. and what might just be the check mark that goes forward to the state. So I wanted to give you this because I wanted you to have something that you could use to communicate with, because I don't know how we would do that model. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't-
Well, all the finance people are basically in agreement that it's difficult to do that model, you know, and have it make sense and be able to have it have any more credibility than George's assumptions of no change in any, here's how that would be played out. So, I mean, that may just generate more conversation. Marla, and then we'll move on.
Just a statement you made, Grant, when you were talking about the savings, and you talked about one, two superintendents down to one superintendent. I just wanted to remind this committee that we used to have a superintendent and an assistant superintendent at CCSU. And Judy opted to work without an assistant superintendent so we could move into the data system. So I don't want people to be concerned that they're going to lose Mark. I just don't want people out there to think that they're going to have to choose between Mark and Judy. It's going to be a really large district. I don't think you're going to lose.
And I think that maybe long-term, those are things, and of course, it'll be the new board that will decide staffing issues. But whenever I say I phased in those savings, the superintendent was in there for at least 2 years because of transition. So, I mean, I can't say for sure which positions would end up being eliminated. And it's not a specific person, it's the position. So I know there's going to be one business manager eventually. The first year, it's going to be very difficult doing that work. But I think once we get a budget out there, then that will happen. But it might end up being, this person instead of that person, this position instead of that position. But we made some assumptions that we felt were reasonable. And it wasn't just closing down one central office.
I just, going into it, I was afraid of misleading. I know there's going to be cost savings, but I just don't want people to come out of it thinking, oh, we're going to save, X amount of dollars, and then they see 3 years down the road, how come we didn't save all this money? So I think your conservative estimates were great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. So the last thing for tonight is just a quick conversation and more of a heads up on what's happening with the survey. I wonder. And I wonder if you might be willing to just run us through the slides that you prepared to give folks a sense of what's happening with the survey.
These slides are the questions that
Both, actually. These slides, and then I think your summary would be great.
All right, we can go through this really quick. The survey had 5 questions, so this is a breakdown of the 513 responses now that we have, and what we received. After we looked at this, one of the questions, question 4, was, what questions do you have about RED? And I just sent that document to everyone, the answers we received, but today, really quickly, I took about half an hour to try to buzz through 200 plus and group them into 4 or 5 groupings, and I'll show you that after. Just have to make this a little bit bigger. So this is the first question. How did you hear about the RED? The one thing that jumped out to me, was a survey, but I'll just scroll down, it's easier to read these numbers a little bit, I think, is over a third of the people heard about the RED from the survey. So,
That'd be a great benefit of the survey.
yeah. So right away, there's 177 people that had no idea, that took the survey, that had no idea of the RED before they actually saw this email pop up in their inbox somewhere or online. So this first question, that was the first one that jumped out to me. 31% of the people read about it in the Essex Reporter. It's great. Word of mouth was the third highest total, 20%. So thank you to everyone who's spreading word of mouth. And then there's the other ones kind of dropped off a little bit, but Front Porch Forum, nearly 19%. So those are the top 4 areas where people are hearing about this. So it just gives us an idea of how to communicate what we're doing well, what we need to improve upon.
Well, I think one of the other points, Ben, is that we'll see later in some of the questions, it's pretty clear in the questions that are being asked that a third of these people are just hearing about the red from the survey, because they're asking a lot of questions or they're jumping to conclusions and obviously have not had the time to look at the FAQ or to learn more about the project and going forward.
Question 2, what do you value most about your current educational systems? Let's scroll down here. 77% of the people said the high quality public education. Next closest, 40%, a wide variety of educational experiences. And then these 3, robust funding for schools, curriculum, comparative success in global economy, and access up to the date information resources, we're all on the same. So it just gives you an idea of what the community is looking for, what's important to them, far and away, high quality public education, and variety of experiences. So these are factors you can think of when we get into the section of communicating the next level, reaching out to forums, some of the questions you're going to be receiving, and start to think about how we're going to answer those.
Ben, were they allowed to choose more than one?
Yes.
Yes. I think all of these you can choose more than one.
Numbers may add up to more than one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we changed this up gold we could. What appeals most to you about Formula Red? 2 top answers were administrative efficiencies, reduced costs, and reduction of duplicated expenses. I don't think that's much of a shock for people. It's probably they expected. Simplified budgets and tax rates was right up there at 40%. Learning opportunities for students and staff. A lot of it showed saving money. That's what people care about. We'll come back to this question. Question 4 is what questions do you have? So I have the list. I just sent the list to everyone, but I'll show you the breakdown that I put together really quick once we get through to 5. And what is your preferred method of communication? And I think these line up pretty well for the first question of how did you hear about the red? 43% of people say they like the Essex Reporter. That's where they find out their information. 41% from Front Porch Forum. 40% school websites. And the others a little behind.
So not a lot of interest in going to meetings.
I honestly do not think people have time.
No, that's right.
So I tried to buzz through the answers really quickly this afternoon, and I narrowed it down to 1, 2, 3, 4 main topics that I thought the questions centered around. The first one is education. A lot of these questions, like Brendan said, it just shows you people haven't read through the site, don't have a lot of information about it. A lot of these questions are answered on the site. We've discussed, this board's discussed them often, but I'm just trying to pull what the common themes were from the responses. I can send this to everyone. I've got to tighten it up a little bit. Like I said, it's a little rough right now, but some of the highlights, like I said, education was a big one. How will curriculum be aligned? How will resources be affected? And will limiting administration affect curriculum learning? I think money is probably the biggest section that stuck out compared to the rest. People want to know costs and savings. It's what keeps talking about here as well. But it also, there's a lot of information on the site. Layoffs for teachers and staff. Who's going to decide on decisions of cuts? Once tax incentives are gone, how much money will we save? Will we need to build new or bigger schools? Common teacher contracts? Will this lower my taxes? How will the tax savings be used? A lot of this, like I said, most of this has come up here. Size, will we overcrowding? Will we have a mega district? Can the EHS handle all the Westford students? One that I thought really stood out a few times was people were worried about the leadership. If we too far removed from the schools, and there are too many schools, only one board, but they able to handle all the decisions for all the different schools. Since now we have 5 boards, putting it to one, it's gonna be less personalized, and that came up a lot of times. I feel. when the school would be closed. That came up at least 20, 25 times probably. Control and choice. Mostly, and obviously we didn't put any demographics in here, so you can't tell where they're from, but most of them, the people that did have questions about this reference Westford, but there was a few about Essex Town as well, so it wasn't just Westford, I did notice. School choice, what all students from Westford have to go to EHS. Students attend current schools or do redistricting. And then these I didn't quite get around to classifying, but some other ones, timing and implementation schedule, how will busing be handled, I know it's a big topic. What's going to happen to EGRP, where administrative offices be located. What's different now than when they've seen this in the past. Group of positions, how the cultures be blended, and what would the disadvantages be. It was nice to see that too, a few people did reference that they had looked at the site, and they did reference the frequently asked questions, you know, negative and positively. Some people thought that the FAQs only looked at the positive side of things instead of the negatives. So that was one question, what would be the disadvantages, what would be the negatives, what if we didn't do this? And I think the communication committee tried to address that recently. On the frequently asked questions, we added another question saying that if we didn't do this, this would happen. I think it just leads to show you that the community still needs to be educated. A lot of people had no idea about this in general, about this group sitting here talking once or twice a week, and there's still a lot more education to do and communicating that can be done. But I think it's a great start, and to have over 500 responses in just over 48 hours. I think it's pretty good.
So two things. There were a lot of, and this wasn't a question, but there were, I thought, a lot of, it's about time, we should do this, blah, blah. The other thing that I didn't see reflected up there is I saw a lot of, will the Westford School close? I don't want the Westford School to close.
Yeah, I think it's one of those.
It's the heart of our community.
School closed, yeah. Plenty of schools get closed. I may put our size, but it could be under control or choice. Like I said, I just buzzed through for about half an hour trying to prove them.
You know, I brought this up to Brendan before. It seems a little odd that we haven't put out a press release, say to somebody like the Essex Reporter, which is what most people in this area would read. With, you know, like I always said, the majority of people don't even know what it is. They just learned it from this survey, which seems, you know, odd.
The Essex Reporter, I mean, we can't tell them what to post. They've come to a few meetings, I think 4 or 5 times. They've probably posted recaps of meetings. But it is tough, because I know it's come up a few times in these meetings, and we can't just tell the reporter, hey, post this. This is the information out there.
I know, but people would normally send these to, you know, various publications, you know,
We
a
can send it.
press release. A press release, I think, and we would cover like school closings or not choice, we're not gonna be doing, like the real things that we already know that are given on this, you know, in this committee. I don't know, like, why we haven't done that, because I feel like a lot of people don't know about it.
Yeah, it's up to this committee, and if you want to communicate that to the communications task team, that's something that can be done. I mean, you can always send things to the reporter, it's up to them if they print or not, but
With the real, true facts, not, you know, diluted or polluted, or when a gentleman is given the floor in the middle of our meeting to say whatever he wants, you know? And now the reporter just gets that part of it. It's,
that's also the way, I mean, I agree with you, it's just the way media works.
yeah, I know,
You can't
I
control
know,
that.
but I'm just saying.
Question, I guess, for Brendan and you, because you do a lot with the communication, but after we're doing this survey and certain questions are being raised, will there be an answer put out, and who's responsible? Because I'm not sure some of those answers can come from the communications committee. I have the feeling this committee or a team from this committee is going to have to sit down, or administration, and answer and correct some of the misassumptions.
Yeah, so the purpose of the survey was to get the word out and to get a sense of what some of the questions are. And I think in that respect, you know, the survey has been successful. Right? People are now aware of it, they weren't aware of it before, and we have an understanding of what some of those questions are. But this is just one piece of what we need, and that's a larger communication plan. What we did see is we saw some new comments on the website, which now need to be responded to. The Communications Task Force has talked about how to respond to some of those comments made on the website. But the survey, you know, wasn't meant to be sort of the end-all be-all of the public communication phase. And clearly, it's just not on people's minds. And so we have a lot of work to do to just explain, you know, we almost need an FAQ about what a red isn't, as opposed to what a red is. So there's a lot more that we need to do around communication. Because the focus of phase one was for this committee to come to a recommendation, and to not necessarily spend all of our time focused on community engagement, but we need to do that if we go into the next phase of this process. Yes?
We're living in a time of unprecedented, at least in my lifetime, distrust of government and institutions, organizations that kind of run things in this country. I don't think it's a good idea for a committee like this to meet for an extended period of time without some kind of statements about what they're up to. You don't want people see the survey was a good idea, but not everybody took it. And you don't want people to get the idea that this is a committee who's sitting up here making decisions and nothing they have to say or how they feel about it is going to have any impact. And that's the kind of attitude that people in this country seem to have now, that our institutions aren't working for us. I agree with you when you say there should be some kind of press release from this committee. It doesn't have to be a big, you know, we're going to try to convince you, but just a few statements about the kinds of things that we're talking about and that we're looking at, and that we are interested in other people's ideas.
Good point. Yeah. Well,
Piggybacking on what Linda's saying, I sent you and Brian a piece of my feelings, and I talked about doing a personal piece on committee members, and not history, and not individual members, and including administration and Brian, who's our facilitator, and you, who's our chair. Because when I wish Tom James was here, when I sat there and was observing when we were trying to do a union high school, I can't tell you how many people came out to the forums, and the group of people that sat on that committee got yelled at, and the thing that they kept getting pushed at, what's your motivation? Why are you doing this? I mean, they could get very mean. And I thought after I left here the last time, I just started thinking, we're spending a lot of time. And I think a piece on what is motivating us all to sit here, what motivates Mark and Judy, Vince and Ben, there's not enough money to pay them back for this type of work, or Brian as a facilitator, or you doing the chair. You're not getting any money for this. So I think there needs to be a personal interest piece that comes out about motivations and why we decided to look at this.
yeah, that's a great sentiment.
So-
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that, you know, part of what often happens in these kind of debates is that people, especially when it gets contentious, is that people forget that there are people behind the decision making. And yes, we're all sitting here because we have a vested interest, and none of us are being paid. And so I think that I love that idea. I think it's a great idea that it personalizes and humanizes the fact that we've been meeting since March, talking about these things.
It comes down to what motivates people to volunteer.
Yeah,
And in this case, I think the children are in the center, whether we're talking about tax savings or not. Saving taxes, helping with tax rates, it saves children's programs in the long run.
yes.
Well, to follow up on what Heidi and Marla and Linda have said, I think a press release or something from our PR committee that would just outline what we've done meeting by meeting, just very factual. The fact that we are information gathering it and been doing it for a long time. We're not pushing any agenda. We've been trying, here are the people we've had talk to us, here's what they talked about. Just to give people an outline of what we've been doing. And then I think following up with, you know, that whole motivation thing, I think is really an interesting way of approaching this because you have people always, you know, right on their forehead they have W-I-F-M. What's in it for me, you know? Why are you doing it?
Well, I know the communication task force is trying to schedule a meeting, and I think that larger communication plan is something that we need to get on right away.
But they could have a series of these planned out to start letting people, I mean, one of the things that, when Heidi first mentioned that I thought about with the Chittenden East, their presentation was that they didn't want to go out to the community until they really had all their ducks in a row.
Right.
We don't have all our ducks in a row, but at least we can tell people that, you know, we're still working on it.
We're still learning.
And we could tell them what we know for sure. We're not gonna, misconceptions, get them right out by focusing on what we know for sure without the articles.
Isn't there a way for the committee to give permission for you as our chair or Brian as our facilitator to take some pieces and ask the Essex Reporter to, put them in the letters, not a letter to the editor, but an opinion piece, or, there could be weekly things put in, maybe something that came out from the survey.
They're always,
And they're always looking for stories.
It doesn't have to be just communications committee, correct?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, when I was on the Essex Town School Board, we rotated every other week perspectives article for the Essex Reporter. And so I don't think there would be anything wrong with us approaching them about doing something similar for this committee. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I don't think that's the role of the communications committee. I think it should come with one voice from the chair and the facilitator.
And it could be something we take advantage of that communications committee and have Brendan's name be put on it. Because I do think that message is much better listened to if it's not from the external person, it's from the local community.
The local.
Well, those are all great ideas, and I think I've heard loud and clear from the committee that it would be great for either myself or someone, following this meeting to issue some kind of either perspective article or a letter to the editor to sort of give an update on the committee's work. It might make sense for that coming out right after the survey, since a lot of people are suddenly aware of it. Might be a good timing.
Kathy, did you have something? I thought you had your hand up there.
I was just gonna say, as a member of the communications committee, one of my responses, I think, was for getting the information out, that it should come from Brendan, but that it needs to probably be a collective voice. And I think you agreed with that in one of the emails that you were okay with that. I'd be happy to draft something for our next communications meeting, and then folks can take a look at it, at least for a first something out, follow up, and contact the Essex Reporter.
That would be great. Thank you.
There's one other thing too.
Yep.
It is written on a rock somewhere in India that the mind can only absorb what the fatty can endure. And we need to have a break, a 10-minute break,
Gotcha.
It's a long period for people to sit.
Thank you for that feedback,
Put
yes.
this in the agenda for next time.
We'll build in a break, I appreciate that, yeah. I had the same thought myself, mid-meeting, yes. We're over time, so I just want to make sure that we wrap things up here.
I just wanted to put in a thought for everybody. I think we're going to have a pretty serious discussion next time about that large voting. And I think people should really think about the pros and cons about that. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the Westford residents. Would they see that as a power grab away from them or an opportunity to get more seats? I think there's a number of different ways of looking at the pros and cons of at-large voting. And the other thing is, all this thumbs up made me think of Keely every vote because she taught Latin and teaches Latin, and all I remember from Latin was, you kill them or not, in the Coliseum. I've never done so many thumbs up.
I wasn't thinking of that at the time, but thank you for that.
Brian, you just want to give a quick summary of our next meeting, just in that.
So we'll finish the articles that we have at least scheduled, but clearly an important part, and we'll work on the sequencing of it, was to review a little bit more on the finance around the assets, liabilities, the maintenance plans, and the fund reserves. So those have been questions that have kind of continued here. And then we'll get through as many of the additional articles as we can. You do have some big ticket items in terms of the last meeting. One was the at-large versus the proportional representation of the board. That seems like that's a significant one. And then the other issue was on the arrangements about the agreements about where the assets and liabilities get owned and at what cost and what happens afterwards. And I think the other piece is, some of this other stuff is going to be beyond the Articles of Agreement. The issues around school closings, the issues about school choice and opportunities. I think you're going to be putting together some kind of narrative to go with your articles that will explain that to people. And I think there will be a lot of communications that's going to go on. And I think what's nice is you do have some feedback from the public. You've got a way of breaking that stuff down and starting to respond to it. I don't think any of those categories that Ben put up are any different than what you've been talking about. You know that there are some pretty significant focus areas for people to ask questions about. And one is about equality, and one is about what's going to happen to me or my kid, and what's the finances going to be.
And it's just, we didn't add any other articles, and I heard a couple times mention the idea of, protecting and not closing schools within a certain time frame. And the other, which came up at a meeting that was at with the Secretary of Education, a board retreat for the Vermont School Boards Association, where she spoke to the critical importance of, she had three things that she spoke to, but the first was defining roles and responsibilities for this to be successful for larger entities providing pre-K-12 education. And she gave like one sentence on board responsibility, one sentence on superintendent responsibility, and one sentence on the principal responsibility. And I asked her if that is so critical, it's not part of the required articles, and she said, oh, that's an oversight. And so I don't know whether we will see that come out of being required in articles, or we would want to anticipate the importance of that. And that is responsive to the idea that people are concerned with how does this bigger structure work, who's in charge of what, so we have the opportunity to add other articles, and whether it's, the protecting school closing or looking at defining roles and responsibilities. I would strongly encourage that, and I don't know where that fits in the.
Well, I think that any other articles, I would just say if there's anything that's been outstanding that we haven't addressed and people want to make sure that there's something else, is bring that with you as we go forward into the next two sessions.
Well, we're over time, so I want to thank everybody. Our next meeting is
25th, Thursday. And we will do the articles, we'll do the finances, and The other big one is the advisability of necessary districts. So those will be things you can find.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.